In this video, we explore a true crime case that shocked an entire community and changed countless lives forever. In the market town of Machynlleth in Welsh, it was early evening, and the light was already going out. The gray sky looked good with the street lamps, and there was a light mist over the hills that surrounded the town like a wall. Kids playing in the streets of the Bryn-y-Gog neighborhood all afternoon. There were bikes sliding on the wet ground, a football that kept hitting a wall, and a dog barking, wanting to go inside. The kids who were playing that night included a pink-loving 5-year-old girl, a little girl who came into the world early and was weak, but who knew how to fight right away. Before we get into the full story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life crime stories just like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update, because the cases we cover reveal the darkest sides of human behavior and the investigations that bring the truth to light. I'd also love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment and tell me which country you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel and how many people around the world are joining this community of awareness and curiosity. All right, let's get started. April Jones was her name. She was born almost 2 months early in 2007, and her first weeks were spent in a hospital with lots of machines and lots of careful care. Later, doctors told her she had mild cerebral palsy, a disease that affected her left side and made it harder for her to walk and keep her balance. April worked a little harder than other kids who just ran. She went to the doctor regularly and took her medicine every day. She had parents named Coral and Paul who were always watching out for her. They wanted to let her live freely, but also wanted to keep her safe. April Jones, on the other hand, did not live. Like a fragile child with her family, she lived like the sun in the middle of a small world. Yasmin, her older half-sister, and Harley, her younger brother, were always around her. She laughed out loud, begged to be cuddled all the time, and insisted on doing everything the other kids did. She adored things with sparkles, the color pink, riding her little bike, and quickly believing she could keep up with everyone else. People who lived nearby knew her as the happy girl from the estate. She was always ready with a shy smile that turned into laughs quickly. Machynlleth was a town where people's lives mixed in complicated ways. It was in a valley bordered by hills covered in trees and rivers that ran quickly. The kind of scenery that looked peaceful at first glance but was actually very rough and dangerous. The neighborhood was close. People knew what cars each other had. Kids knew which front doors to knock on in case they fell off their bikes. With its simple homes and shared play areas, the Bryn-y-Gog farm felt like an extension of the Jones family's living room. April's world was small, but she felt safe in it. On October 1st, 2012, a Monday, the Jones family fell into a pattern that felt like it was old news. April worked on her weak leg in another way by taking her to the neighborhood recreation center for swimming lessons. After that, there was an evening for parents at school. She had a handicap, but her teachers talked about how she was making progress, how she was determined, and how her smile lit up the room. It should have been getting dark when the family got home, so the day should have been coming to an end. Instead, the night turned into a nightmare that changed everyone's lives on Bryn-y-Gog and beyond. April asked to play outside again when they got back. For a 5-year-old with extra energy, the pull of one more game or bike ride was too strong. She had already spent most of the day without her parents. They told her no at first. It was late. The light was going out. They needed her to come in. April had never been afraid to show how she felt, so she broke down in tears and spoke out. She was strong and would fight for what she wanted. Coral and Paul finally gave in, but with terms. She could leave, but only for a short time, and only near the house, where they knew she would be with friends she had known her whole life. It looked like a really small deal. One more game, one more time to be a kid and be free. Then she ran out the door, into the estate, and out of sight into the soft October evening darkness. Another life had been coming and going from Machynlleth's orbit for a long time before that night. Mark Bridger was born in 1965 in Surrey. He was raised in a town far from the Welsh hills by a police officer and a housewife. He went to school in Croydon and got average grades when he graduated. But by the time he was a young adult, he was already into habits that would last for decades. As a youth, he got a gun. Conviction. After that, he did a lot of small crimes like theft, criminal damage, driving offenses, and assault. Trouble seemed to follow him everywhere, but he always managed to stay just on the other side of things going badly. Bridger was known as the man who always seemed to be starting over in many small towns by the time he moved to and around Machynlleth. He went from job to job and changed what he said about himself each time. He said he was a soldier, a brave rescuer, and a man carrying the weight of impossible disasters at different times. Those stories rarely stood up to close examination. In the end, his friends and partners called him a fantasist who lied not just to hide things, but also to change his own past. Like his personal life, his work past was all over the place. People heard that he was okay with blood and death because he worked in a slaughterhouse. He worked as a lifeguard, a hotel worker, a mechanic, and a welder during the day. He was a different person at each job, but none of them lasted long. A string of bad relationships did last. Bridger had 6 kids with 4 different women. He lived in rented cottages and shared houses and left a wake of fear, anger, and sadness. Some people who used to be with him said he was controlling and unstable, and that he could go from being charming to threatening very quickly. People's lives sometimes got too close together in Machynlleth, which is a pretty small town. The children of Bridger are connected to April's half-siblings through friendships and extended family ties. The Jones family knew his name. He wasn't a stranger in a car that no one knew about. In the town, family and friends held everything together, and he was just another adult face in the web. People saw him driving his Land Rover on winding roads, in pubs, and on the farm. Most people in the area thought he was just another man with a troubled past. But behind closed doors, a grim story was being told. Later, police would find hundreds of sex of children on his computer, as well as files about well-known child killings and abductions. He had read a lot of stories about being weak, violent, and powerful. On the outside, he lived in a cottage in the middle of nowhere called Mount Pleasant. It was surrounded by woods and hills. Inside that house, there was both a fantasy life and a messy real life with unpaid bills, tense relationships, and projects that were not finished. A man who often lied, had a past of violence, and was sexually interested in children, lived on the edge of a community full of families who trusted each other. Bridger just floated through life, but April's life took a very different turn. She learned how to read and deal with her physical limits by going to school and being stubbornly brave. Paul, her dad, often took her to the hospital and made sure she took her medicine as prescribed. Coral, her mother, was torn between wanting to keep an eye on her and letting her daughter run free. Yasmin, her sister, was growing up and having her own hopes and problems, but she was still very close to the little girl who seemed so innocent in a place where everyone knew each other. On October 1st, 2012, these two people's lives finally came together in a way that would destroy their sense of safety for good. At 7:15 that night, April and a friend rode their bikes near the farm. A gray Land Rover Discovery pulled up to left-hand drive. It was different enough from the other cars there that it stood out. Later, a child witness said that the driver talked to April like he knew her, that she didn't feel scared around him, and that she got into the car on her own. The man in the car didn't seem strange to the little girl from her small town, where she knew faces and cars. That car pulled away. Its engine had a weak sound. The area it left behind was filled with the normal noise of kids playing. A few minutes later, Coral realized she couldn't see April outside. What started as a mild worry quickly turned into fear. When she didn't see her, she called her name and asked other kids if they had seen her. It didn't make sense to me. A car had been there. April got inside. No one had seen her come back. To get help, Coral called 911 at 7:29 p.m. At that point, the absence of one little girl turned into a major event that would hold the attention of the whole country. The police quickly got to Bryn-y-Gog. The kids, who were still shaking with fear and confusion, were asked to give quotes. After a description of the car, there was a hazy picture of a man who some people knew, but others didn't. In Machynlleth, the news spread like a shockwave as police searched the estate. A simple question spread from house to house as phones rang and doors opened. Does anyone know where April is? That night, the police started a big operation. From the beginning, they thought it was a kidnap, not a child who had just gotten lost. The nearby roads were swept by patrol cars. The house Gardens, sheds, and alleys were searched by police. Helicopters flew over, and their searchlights shone through the valley's blackness. Within hours, search and rescue teams, volunteers for mountain rescue, and people who know how to handle dogs were sent back to the town. The leisure center turned into a command center where maps were stuck to the walls and people lined up to give their help. The chaos that started turned into a planned search that grew into the biggest operation of its kind in British police history. Over the next few days and weeks, police officers and civilians searched an area of about 32 square kilometers that included rivers, ravines, forests, and old quarries. They waded through cold, moving water and pushed through thick thorns and trees, calling April's name over and over into a world that didn't care. The hills that had made Machynlleth feel safe now made her feel like they were going to swallow up the little girl whose pink ribbons were everywhere, as signs of hope. As the search grew, detectives back at the station followed the path that Grey Land Rover had taken. In a town where strangers were seen driving around and where people looked out for each other, it wasn't long before the same name kept coming up. Police caught 46-year-old Mark Bridger less than 24 hours after the kidnapping. His Land Rover fit what the kids had said about it. One of his cars had been seen near the farm. Some families with ties to April's knew him. The weak web of comfort that used to make him seem safe was now the main reason people thought he was guilty. While police questioned Bridger, search teams kept looking all over the valley. At first, there was still hope that April was still living and hiding somewhere, waiting to be found. But as the hours turned into days, that hope faded. In an announcement on October 5th, cops said they were investigating a murder case. It was terrible news for a neighborhood that had put pink ribbons on lampposts and taped up missing signs in every store window. But the evidence that was coming out of the shadows was getting too bad to overlook. The story moved to Bridger's rented cottage, Mount Pleasant, which was on the edge of the town of Stay Little, which was close by. From the street, the house looked like a private refuge, hidden from view of the neighbors, surrounded by trees and fields that sloped down. When the police arrived, they saw a scene that showed a lot of stress and hurry. The house was too hot to be comfortable because the heat was turned up, and there was a fire going strong in the grate. There was a strong smell of cleaners. The floors and surfaces looked like they had been scrubbed recently. That night and the next few days, forensic teams searched the land very carefully. They used special lights, chemical sprays, and a microscope to try to figure out what the story was that was written on the floors and walls. What they found put an end to any remaining hopes that April had just been hidden. Blood was found in small spots and smears on different surfaces. With the help of forensic research, they found April's DNA. The pattern and spread of the DNA did not match a small injury. The amount of bleeding shown by the blood led experts to the conclusion that the child whose blood it was could not have lived. Up next to the furnace, even scarier proof showed up. Tiny pieces of bone that are calcined and broken from the extreme heat. Later, experts found out that they belonged to a young child. The fire that made the house so hot wasn't just there to keep people warm, it had been used to hurt. At the same time, digital forensics officers looked at Bridger's computer. They saw inappropriate pictures of kids and read about other kidnappings and killings of kids. The man who was being interviewed said he was confused and had lost his memory. He had spent time looking at and reading stories and pictures about children who were hurting. The things that happened to April were thought to have been caused by her dreams. Since they didn't have the whole body, they couldn't figure out every detail, but they did get a very scary shot. A man who had a past of violence and lying had taken a weak little girl, raped and killed her, and then used fire, cleaning, and his knowledge of the area to hide and spread out what was left. During this time, the search for April's body continued. The banks and water of the nearby rivers Dulles and Defied were searched by police officers and civilians. They looked in woods and ravines and sent specialized teams into caves and abandoned factories to look for clues. The neighborhood didn't give up on trying to bring her home. Even after the truth hit, they still wanted a place to cry, a grave to visit, and to know that she had been found. The days turned into weeks, but the countryside still kept its secrets. The story moved from the hills of mid-Wales to a courtroom in Mold in April 2013, almost 7 months after April. went missing. It was there in front of a judge and jury that the quiet town with the sad faces and pink ribbons had seen its tragedy turned into proof, testimony, and an argument. A skilled Queen's counsel led the prosecution as they carefully and devastatingly laid out their case. They talked about a man who had violent dreams for years, looked for pictures and stories of children being abused, and lived his whole life telling lies to change how other people saw him. On that October night, they said, he took advantage of the fact that he knew April from playing near the road, using that to gain her trust and get her into his car. They showed the Mount Pleasant forensic proof, bloodstains that carried her DNA, bone pieces burned in the fireplace, the cottage getting warmer faster, and the mad scramble to get rid of any signs of what had happened. They told the jury about the search operation and how hard everyone worked to find one little girl. They also talked about how sad it was that only pieces of her body had ever been found. They put pictures that were found on his computer next to what happened that night so that the jury could see the trend that the investigators thought was clear. It wasn't a terrible mistake. People said it was the end of a long secret life in which children were used as items in a man's mind in a fantasy world. Bridger told a very different story to defend himself. He said that he had been drinking and panicking when he ran April over with his Land Rover near Bryn-y-Gog. He also said that he didn't remember what he had done with her body. He said he didn't have a reason and that he was just a broken man who had made a terrible mistake. In the witness box, he cried and said he didn't mean to hurt her. He also said that his memory had been messed up by shock and drink. The jury heard both sides, but the physical proof had its own story to tell. There were no signs of damage to the car that fit what he said happened. 4. An unexpected death to be true, the person involved had to clean up after the body, burn it in the fireplace, and lie to police over and over again. The fact that he had pictures of child abuse on his devices and worked quickly and thoroughly to get rid of physical proof cut through the story of panic and confusion. The man in the dock had a past of lying and being violent. The girl at the heart of the case had been weak in the past. There was no way to ignore the inequality. After less than 2 days of thinking about it, the jury came back with their choice. Mark Bridger was found guilty of kidnapping and killing April Jones, as well as of obstructing justice by getting rid of her body and damaging evidence. He was in the dock as the judge gave him a term that showed how bad the crime was and how much pain he had caused April's family by not telling them the truth. The judge gave the person a life term with a whole life order. Bridger would never get out of jail. It was some justice. That Coral and Paul were found guilty, but it wasn't real peace for Yasmin and Harley, the rest of the family, or the people of Machynlleth. People were glad that the bad guy would never get away with it. The town had come together in a way that made people proud, but there was also a raw, unfinished sadness. April's body had never been found in its entirety. The person who took her didn't want her family and friends to know the full finish, so he kept the last details of the story a secret. After several months, detective work on the pieces found in Mount Pleasant let the family have a funeral. The small box that went through Machynlleth in a glass carriage did not hold a whole child. It only held a few pieces that scientists could identify. A lot of people in town wore pink, which April loved so much, to line the streets. Behind the carriage, her family walked, carrying a load that no parent should ever have to carry. April's case had an effect on many people in the years that followed. The girl's parents and sister pushed for stronger punishments for people who had pictures of child abuse on the internet. Journalists, lawmakers, and activists used her name in arguments about what tech companies should do, how the justice system should handle and how much the public should be protected. In the end, the Welsh government bought Bridger's house and had it torn down. The place where cops thought April had died was turned into a memorial instead of a memorial to his crimes. The effects on the Jones family were bigger than any political effort. Living with that loss and unsolved questions put a lot of stress on people, which led to breaks that never fully healed. Later, Paul had a lot of health problems, and he spent his last years in care. During his journey, he always remembered that he never found out what happened to the rest of his daughter's body. Yasmin's childhood was traumatic because her little sister died in a very public and violent way. She talked about how it made her want to hurt herself before she slowly turned her pain into a drive to protect other children. The case was over for the town of Machynlleth, and it will stay that way. People remembered the times they had to walk through fields and rivers at all hours of the day and night to find a little girl. Kids who were not there before played in the streets that were once full of search teams and TV crews. The pink ribbons faded, were taken down, and got worn down, but the story became a part of the town's history. At the heart of it all was April Jones, a 5-year-old girl who had fought her way into the world and learned to live with a disability that didn't define her. April loved swimming lessons, bike rides, and the color pink. A child who had been given one more chance to play outside on a familiar property, near family and friends, in a town that had always felt safe. Lawyers used Mark Bridger's case to tell the story of a man who got a life sentence for lying, killing, and hiding his wants. In terms of people, it was about what happened when that man met a little girl who believed in everything. There were people in the community who looked until they could not go on, police who built a murder case without a body, and a family whose grief was made worse by the secrets the killer of their daughter chose to keep. Before the reporters moved on to other stories, there was one truth that those who had lived through it could not forget. In a narrow sense, justice had been done. But for those who loved April, and for the town that for a short time became the center of the world's attention, the real sentence was to always remember the little girl who went out to play one fall evening and never came back. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me today. Your support truly means the world. Every view, every like, every comment, every share. It all helps this channel grow and allows us to continue exploring these cases with depth, respect, and clarity. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any future videos. And each case is researched carefully to bring you stories that deserve to be told and remembered. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think justice was served? What part of this case stood out to you the most? I read every single comment, and your insight adds so much to this community. By being here, you're not just watching a video, you're becoming part of a growing community that values truth, awareness, and understanding. Together, we can keep these conversations alive, honor the victims, and learn from the darkness in the world around us. Thank you again for your time, your attention, and your support. Stay safe, stay aware, and take care of yourselves and the people around you. I'll see you in the next video.